Constant enemy pressure makes this situation very precarious. Lieutenant Colonel James Cushing radioed Brisbane from the hills above Cebu on April 1944. 5 days later, he was rolling a stack of Japanese documents, tight enough to fit inside 2 empty mortar shells. Cushing had been a mining engineer in the Philippines before the war. He now commanded several thousand American and Filipino guerrillas on Cebu. He had perhaps 25 men with him at any given moment, and he was being hunted across the island by a force in the hundreds. He handed the shells to 2 escaped American prisoners of war, Russ Snell and Jimmy Dyer, and told them to walk. They left on the 15th of April, crossed Cebu, crossed the Tanon Strait, and reached the headquarters of Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Andrews in the hills behind a coastal village on southern Negros on the 28th. 13 days on foot with the operational orders of the Imperial Japanese Combined Fleet in their packs. 2 weeks earlier, on the last night of March, 2 Japanese flying boats had left Palau for the Philippines. One carried Admiral Minichi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, who had just told his Chief of Staff that Yamamoto had died at the right time and that the 2 of them should go out and die together. Koga's aircraft flew into a storm and went into the sea with everyone aboard. The second aircraft, carrying the Chief of Staff and a briefcase holding the fleet's war plan, came down in the Bohol Strait about 2.5 miles off Cebu at 2:30 in the morning. 12 men died. 12 got out, including the Chief of Staff, who swam for the beach believing the plan had gone down with the wreck. The plan did not sink because it was packed in a wooden box and the box floated. 3 mornings later, a shopkeeper named Pedro Gantuangoko saw something in the water off the beach at Perilos and sent a neighbor, Opoy Wammer, out in a boat to fetch it. Wammer opened it and found a red leather portfolio with a Z on the cover under a film of oil and seawater. Gantuangoko told him to leave the box in the boat, anchored in plain sight a couple of dozen yards off the beach, and wait for dark. Japanese troops walked that beach at noon looking for exactly this, and nobody searched the boat. That night, the 2 men carried the box up to a house and laid the wet packets out on a split bamboo floor to dry. There was a pouch of small gold nuggets in with the paper, and they kept the gold as spoils of war. The next evening, they buried the box. The Japanese Navy did not give up. 200 troops combed the village and went through every house. Tide and current specialists took similar boxes out to the crash site and let them drift, and the boxes came ashore at Perilos every time, which told them precisely where to look and nothing whatever about where it had gone. They assembled the villagers and offered rice and cloth to anyone who would talk. Nobody talked. They burned Perilos, then raised the offer to 50,000 pesos, then dropped leaflets across the island addressed to Cushing by name with a deadline on them. Far to the east, an American fleet was loading for the Marianas. Operation Forager committed 535 ships and the largest landing force yet put ashore anywhere in the Pacific, and the officer answerable for all of it was Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding 5th Fleet from the cruiser Indianapolis. On the night of June 18th, with a position report placing the Japanese carrier fleet some 350 miles west-southwest of him, and with Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher asking permission to run west overnight and be in launch position at dawn, Spruance refused and turned the carriers back toward the island. That is the most argued command decision of the Pacific War. Every aviator in Task Force 58 read it as a gunnery officer flinching from a carrier battle. The reading stuck for 4 decades. The bitterness in Mitcher's own summing up afterwards set the tone for nearly everything written since. It survived Spruance, it survived most of the men who made it, and it is still the first thing said about him after Midway. The answer to it had already come out of the sea off Cebu, 6 weeks earlier and 4,000 miles away. On the 11th of May, the submarine Creval stood in towards southern Negros under orders to take off American refugees, which was the cover story. Salvador Abcid, commanding the guerrilla district there, came aboard at 3 minutes to 6 in the evening and told the captain there were 41 civilians on the beach rather than the 25 he had been promised. 40 came aboard, 21 of them children, and one minister decided to stay behind. Abcid also handed over a small wooden box and said MacArthur was anxious to see what was in it. Creval ran on the surface for speed, was attacked from the air, and took 2 severe depth chargings on the way south before reaching the Australian coast on the 19th. The box went ashore at Darwin into a courier's hands onto an aircraft, and 1,800 miles later it was in Brisbane by midday. Translators went to work on it on the 21st at a Brisbane suburb called Indooroopilly. What they had was copy number 6 of 550 of Combined Fleet Secret Operations Order number 73, issued from the battleship Musashi at Palau on March 8th and signed by Koga himself. It was in plain language. It had never been enciphered because it had never been meant to travel anywhere except from one Japanese flag officer to another. Accounts still disagree about which of the 2 admirals was actually carrying it. The National Archives reconstruction puts the portfolio in the Chief of Staff's hands. The Army's historian of the Nisei linguists puts it in Koga's. Both aircraft went into the sea within hours of each other, and neither man ever produced a clean answer. The translation team worked through 2 days and nights. The section head then cranked out 20 copies of the 22-page result on a hand mimeograph, and the first went by officer courier to General Marshall in Washington, the second to MacArthur. The naval officer who grasped what he was looking at was Captain Arthur McCollum, the 7th Fleet's intelligence director who pushed for the translations to reach Pearl Harbor immediately. An Army bomber carried them nearly 5,000 miles in 48 hours, refueling at islands along the way. At Pearl, they landed on the desk of Captain Edwin Layton, Nimitz's fleet intelligence officer, under a stamp forbidding anyone to copy them without MacArthur's permission. Layton could see the work had been done by men who knew Japanese but not the Japanese Navy, so he sent for photostats of the originals and retranslated the whole plan with his own people. His verdict on the Army version was that it had mostly been right. Then it went to sea. A flying boat carried Layton's translation and Nimitz's covering instructions to the anchorage at Eniwetok, where it was put aboard Indianapolis on the 8th of June. Task Force 58 had already sailed. So copies were dropped to Mitcher's flagship on the open ocean. 11 days later, the Japanese came, and they came in the shape the Americans had been handed. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa brought 6 carriers and roughly 450 aircraft and one genuine advantage, which was that his planes outranged the American ones and could fly through. Land on the island airfields behind Task Force 58, refuel, rearm, and hit the fleet again on the way home. He launched 4 raids on the 19th of June. Radar picked up every one of them well out. The fighter direction officers stacked Hellcats in front of each in turn, and the Japanese carrier air arm came apart in a single day. 2 submarines put down 2 of Ozawa's carriers that afternoon, one of them his flagship. Dive bombers caught a 3rd the following evening and sank her. Ozawa lost something like 476 aircraft across the 2 days, and the surviving hulls ran west. The argument started before the fuel smoke had cleared. Vice Admiral John Towers, the senior aviator in the Pacific and Nimitz's deputy, went to Nimitz demanding that Spruance be relieved for letting the enemy fleet escape, and proposed himself as the replacement. The 5th Fleet Chief of Staff wrote at the time that there would be plenty of second-guessing out of Pearl Harbor in Washington by people who don't know the circumstances and won't wait to find them out. He was right about that.
Clark Reynolds put the aviator's case into print in 1968, Thomas Buell answered it in 1974, and William Wyblood was still working the same ground over in 1981. Almost none of it said out loud that the man had been reading the enemy's plan since June 8th.
Koga's successor, Admiral Soimu Toyota, had taken the captured document and modified it rather than throwing it away. The version he issued kept the central idea intact, which was to use the carrier force as a diversion, pulling the American carriers away to the west while the surface fleet came in behind them onto whatever was left uncovered. That idea was sitting in translation aboard Indianapolis 11 days before Mitcher asked permission to steam west in the dark toward a Japanese carrier force. The decisive intelligence coup of the Pacific War spent 13 days of its journey on the backs of two men whose rank nobody bothered to write down. Subscribing is the simplest way to keep catching the ones that turn on somebody like that. The captured plan was also explicit about the airfields. Fighting 600 miles west of Guam would have handed Ozawa the strips on Guam and Tinian as a second flight deck and doubled the value of every sortie he flew, and would have put Task Force 58 inside the reach of the land-based bombers staging down from Japan through the Bonins. Spruance chose to fight with the islands behind him and the enemy obliged to come to him, and what he got was the most one-sided air battle in the history of naval warfare. There is a limit to how hard any of this can be pushed, and the National Archives historian who reconstructed the document's journey sets it out plainly. How much the captured plan actually contributed to the American victory in the Philippine Sea cannot be answered. Spruance never leaned on it in his own defense, and would not have been free to. The men who argued about him for 40 years were arguing about nerve and seamanship out of American action reports, while the one piece of paper that explains the caution sat in a file under a stamp forbidding anyone to copy it. All of it is still filed. The translation of the Z plan is in the records of General Headquarters, Far East Command. Cushing's radio traffic with Brisbane is in the Southwest Pacific Area message files. Creval's report of her special mission of the 9th to the 12th of May is in the records of the Chief of Naval Operations. The post-war interrogation of the officer who lost the briefcase is in the files of the Strategic Bombing Survey. 4 collections, 4 agencies, and the chain that runs through all of them starts with 2 men in a fishing boat off a beach that was burned for what they did.